Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 463. My name is Minter Dial, and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on the Evergreen Network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. So this week's interview I'm very excited about. It's with Manfred Kets de Vries, who's the Distinguished Clinical Professor of Leadership Development and Organisational Change at INSEAD, amongst other posts. He's held professorships at McGill University, the Ecole des Hautes Etudes Commerciales à Montreal, and the Harvard Business School, and has lectured at management institutions around the world. The Financial Times, Le Capital, Wirtschaftswoche, and The Economist rated Manfred as one of the world's top 50 leading management thinkers, as well as one of the most influential contributors to human resource management. He's the author, co-author, or editor of over 50 books and has published over 400 papers as articles or chapters in books. With Manfred, we discuss the most important shifts needed in leadership today: storytelling, inner theater inventory, authentizotic organizations, and some of the other key concepts in his new book, The CEO Whisperer: Meditations on Leadership, Life, and Change, one of the many books Manfred penned during the pandemic. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. Please consider to drop in your rating and review, and please don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Manfred Kets de Vries, I am thrilled to have you on my show. You are the second INSEAD professor I've had the chance to have on my show. I've been tracking your work through all these years. Many years did I go to INSEAD, and you have been a fountain of inspiration, saying it the way it is, and everybody I know that took your class back in those days in the 90s absolutely adored having your class. So, Manfred, in your own words, describe us who you are. You have many hats.
Actually, I like to leave at the moment after the introduction because I will never live up to those expectations. No, I mean, I wear a number of hats, and that's actually, I guess I started as an I was first trying to be a failed engineer. I didn't last very long. I mean, I never made it as an engineer. I failed. But I got depressed thinking about the time I had to spend in the laboratory. Then I took as a negative choice, became an economist. But I also had some interest in psychology. So then I remember when I did in Holland, it's called Economist Doctorandus, it's a master's degree. I had a romantic fantasy about boats. So I got one of those freighters, and it was the most boring. I mean, there was a famous Dutch writer at the time he was a doctor on a boat, and he wrote romantic stories, but my boat was boring, and it was totally boring. And I got off as quickly as possible in Boston, walked to the Harvard Business School. I had actually been at a program, the summer program at Harvard, which I very much enjoyed because, I come from a fairly, in those days people didn't travel so much. And I met lots of people from different countries. And so I talked myself into a special program called the International Teachers Program. At the time, it was the way of the Harvard Business School to propagate the case method. And basically, it was in 1 year of studies. You could pick whatever you wanted, but you had to take one course on cases. That was important. After all, you were trying to be an advocate. And there was one course recommended by the advisor at the time. It was called Psychoanalytic Psychology and Management Theory. I think this is crazy. And so I said, I should take that. So I still remember it so clearly because the first assignment was reading the biography of Freud. If you ever seen it, it's 3 volumes. And my English was not so good. And I was, you have an assignment, you do it. And that's my fantasy about it. And I thought it was going to be a seminar. So I spent a whole week reading the 3 volumes. And of course, I was the only one of the whole It was so crazy. But then suddenly I got into another world, which was interesting at that time, coming from a different country. And you had to read the Red Man, the Wolf Man, and the Psychotic Dr. Schreber case studies. And it was kind of strange, going from economics to that. And the man who was teaching that was a man called Abraham Selesnik, who became my mentor. And so I got into the doctoral program on the way there, and also an MBA. And so, and then I had to find a job. Also, I wanted to become a psychoanalyst because Selesnik was the only person at business school as a psychoanalyst. So I thought that would be a good.
There's a good niche.
I don't know. It was a little bit crazy actually to become a psychoanalyst is a little bit nuts because it's such a lengthy process. Anyhow, I needed a job, and since I had chosen Selesnik, who in his own narcissism had split off from the organizational department, I was not a good politician. I should have joined the other group. I didn't get a job because I was the crown prince, you see, and the crown prince got beheaded. So I first went to INSEAD, and then I got fired there, actually. I was the only one fired and rehired. I was there 2 years, and I still remember the dean at the time who didn't know how to say that I was fired. I couldn't say it. So I only realized when I was walking out the door. It was the same language approach, a lot of good news, and then shoving the bad news very quickly, and then the good news again. So actually, INSEAD the faculty should be very grateful to me because after that, they realized if I was going to be fired, many other people would get fired. And so they have now a faculty evaluation committee. You can be fired like that. That time it was a cabal. Anyhow, I was not really upset about it. I went back to Harvard, still didn't get a job there, a more longer term job because of my crown prince role, because the OB department was, in a way you might know that yourself, but academics can be fantastic in character assassination. And still remember at the time the head of OB department, he will never write anything. Very good motivation, by the way, to tell you, you never write.
Yeah, you'll never be good enough.
No, after 53 books or so, you will never write anything. And whatever he has written with somebody else, you can do it alone, etc., etc. Anyhow, somebody took, INSEAD was willing to get me back. It was interesting. They felt they had made a mistake. But at the same time, I got an offer from Henry Mintzberg. You might have heard of him. Mm-hmm. Famous professor
of course.
in management. And I had been doing a stress study for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Anyhow, I'm telling a long story. Anyhow, I said, I know INSEAD, let me go to Montreal and I can do my psychoanalytic training, which I did there, which was very interesting. So to really mix psychiatry and management. It was very much, dominated by the Department of Psychiatry. Actually, my analyst, Dongier, was the head of the Allen, which was the major mental health think tank at the time in Canada, and also the head of psychiatry, which I had. Again, I'm in this way of naive. I picked him because I felt he was a mensch, a human being, as opposed to some analyzing machines, whatever you might call. But I didn't realize that was a masterstroke because he was, having him as my analyst. People were dancing around because, so I graduated very quickly, actually. It went very quick. So that's how I became an analyst and a professor of management. Then eventually I decided to go back to Europe, which had to do the winters. I like Montreal, by the way.
So do I. I lived there for 4 years.
Yeah, it's a nice city. It's a nice city to bring up children, but it's a long winter.
It is.
Yeah, my wife is Swedish, and she already had seen some long winters in
Sure.
So and the best place in Europe happened to be INSEAD. So I went there, and so I got. So I taught for a long time on my course on organizational behavior, which you said as well. I really enjoyed it. It was a real edutainment to really get the students in. I'm a good entertainer in that respect.
This is true. I confirm.
I'm very good in entertainment there. But then I decided at one point to do something else. And I started what I call sometimes, actually it's called by one of my colleagues, my CEO recycling seminar, which I've been doing actually too long, maybe. I've been doing that for a long time. But the reason I'm doing it is I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, when you do an MBA class, you have your cases, whatever it might be, and you have an idea about the general gist of it. But when I take 21 executives, senior executives, and I never know, I have to be spontaneous. You give a few lecturettes, but for the rest, it's all up to them.
It's a bunch of cats, right?
Exactly. And at around that time also, I got one dean asked me to, since I was the only one at the time. Now everybody talks about leadership. I was the only one who talked about leadership. They asked me because there was a report by the Boston Consulting Group to that we talk about leadership for the world, but we have no leadership programs really. So I had to set up a global leadership center, which was not that easy because of the way resource allocation and things like that. And that time, I also started a program which is called Coaching and Consulting for Change. It became a master degree program. So I was very early in the game. Now everybody in the kitchen sink is a coach, but I joined up with two colleagues who were both psychoanalysts, one American, but trained in Germany, and one Dutch, trained in Holland. So this has become a very successful master degree program, which a number of sections in Singapore and in Fontainebleau. So I did that for a while. I had to also, I had to become a little bit of a manager, an academic entrepreneur, because at the time the dean was then in power, starved me for resources. So I had to be very
resourceful.
Yeah. Deans are sometimes not very visionary. He was not one of the visionary ones.
They're called dean counters instead of bean counters.
He was literally a bean counter. That's his background.
Unsurprisingly.
That was the problem too. I claim to fame. Anyhow, so I did that for a while, and at this point, actually, I guess I got more interested in maybe my age. So from looking at organizations, looking at individuals, and I've written lots of articles and books on narcissism. I guess one of my latest book was called Leadership Unhinged, which is really where I talk about not the Dark Triad, which I don't like the term because it doesn't make sense to me, but the Dark Diet. Because they put the Dark Triad, as you might know, it's narcissism, psychopathology, and Machiavellianism. But Machiavellianism is a derivative, so I think it's better to talk about the Dark Diet. And of course, we had such a great example of a Dark Diet for a long time, running the most powerful country in the world, which was quite remarkable. So I got more interested in mass.
You mean China?
No.
Oh no! Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's another. That's a good guess, actually. I wrote once an article, also in the book. I have a chapter on, I'm making advocacy like we need more leaders for life, which is very good for everybody. Yeah. And so, but that's where Xi Jinping fits into the picture.
Indeed. He's a lifer.
Yeah.
So Manfred, a wonderful career. I can't help but think, how do you advise people to follow their passion when you have had such a circuitous route and gone through so many different parts of businesses? And when you look back, what is it that people should be doing in order to land on the thing that makes them tick?
No, I mean, it's, I'm a very, one of the things people tell me that I don't see myself as very original, but I can take sometimes, I'm Dutch, Dutch is low context culture.
The lowlands.
Yeah. Actually, in my class, we would say sometimes, let's talk Dutch now. No more bullshit. No more go around in circles. And so I am a good translator of trying to take, for example, psychoanalysts. When you look at psychoanalytic writing, it's so convoluted.
Yeah, Carl Jung.
Jung is actually not even so bad, and Freud got the Goethe Award for his writing, or got a Nobel Prize. But other ones are such terrible writers. And the terms they use to really, it's a little bit like I get irritated when I get a doctor's exam and I see all those words and I have no idea what they're talking about. I just use, I've been taught, use your client's language. So talk their language, don't hide behind words, it's a social defense. And so I'm a good translator. And like simple things, I like, for example, 2x2 matrices. So you can put, for example, a simple two-dimensional matrix.
The BCG.
Yeah, but it's not a BCG one. They think more complex because they have to sell themselves.
Of course.
I mean, I spent quite some time with their competitor, McKinsey, trying to make them more human beings to some extent. But, two by two, it would be like, don't like, important, not important. So that's one of the little simple things. So unimportant, don't like, where are you there? You're never going to give, you don't like it. It sucks energy, and you're never going to be good at it. Like, not important, go fishing. It's good for the soul. I mean, there's a Dutch word, as you know, called niksen. You might have heard it, niksen. It means doing nothing. It's good for the soul, doing nothing. Of course, you never do nothing. If you really do nothing, you're dead. Your brain is dead. So you always...
Far niente.
Yeah, no, it's good. I wrote a few articles about it, doing nothing. But it's you don't do nothing. Most of my books I've written walk in the Jardin de Luxembourg or so. When I walk around and look at the children play, or I go swimming or whatever, I might walk on the beach if I'm on the beach, or in the forest. That's why I write my books. Of course, I write it down here, but the ideas are there. I'm a great believer in the 3 B's of creativity. The bed, the bath, and the bus. Although I don't drive, driving is, of course, nowadays with all your gimmicks on your phone, you don't get much peace there. So coming back to my little matrix, then you have a like, important, you should do that, and so you have the 4 quadrants. So I tell people, what gives you energy? That's actually an unconscious way, because 95% of our behavior is unconscious way of getting a sense of what's important to you. What gives you energy, and also what drains you of energy, and of course, you can have the whole situation of being with toxic people. So try to, talk about happiness and positivity and things like that. Try to avoid toxic people. And
entropy.
Yeah, and sometimes, of course, you cannot, might be close family members too. You might be unlucky there. But anyhow, that's, so I try to, I'm also coming back to, I do quite some consulting still, now a lot of it online, although I get a little bit tired of two-dimensionality. It's nice to see people in the real, but it certainly beats traveling. Traveling has become such a pain in the neck, as you know.
That's true.
And so people have the fantasy that I'm a good coach. I tell them I'm a terrible coach, because good coaches ask complex, interesting, deep questions. I'm all over the place. I tell them they're full of idiocy. They are idiots. I give them advice. I'm all over the place. And people make it even be life coaches, career coaches, skill coaches. I once wrote a little article about coaching BS. And they have models. Models, of course, are ways of dealing with anxiety, and it's, of course, nice to have a little more. Of course, we have models in our head, but to hang yourself up on models, I do anything what works. I stand on my head to get some movement, from paradoxical intervention, positive reframing, deep psychoanalytical. Although I'm also cynical about that, because it's sometimes too simplistic. Dream interpretation, like in my class. They come in my class and I say, do you dream? He said, I think I dream, but I don't remember. 2 days later, they all are dreaming happily and offering their dreams and try to make some sense of it. Of course, that's wild analysis, because the only one who can really make sense of your dream is you, if you really know yourself, which of course you don't know yourself, because you have too many defenses. But some people want to at least make an effort to know themselves better. And that's the reason they come to my class. So why they come to my class? They are midlife usually. And like also the people in the master course, they're midlife and start to have some existential concern. When you are under 40, you're immortal. Over 40, time left to live. You look at your body and it's falling apart. Your hair is falling out, your wrinkles, eye glasses, hearing aids, whatever it might be. And for men, you're no longer Don Giovanni, which also really hurts. So those narcissistic injury gets at you.
Yeah, a friend of mine just did some research, or at least plowed into some research that showed that actually we peak in income revenues in our early 40s as well. And that generally after that, we're struggling, changing careers. And yeah, and we're getting older. So I have a question for you, Manfred. You mentioned we have these models in our heads, but also think we have stories in our heads, and the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. How do you describe or change the definition of model versus stories in our heads?
You touch upon a very important topic. My wife tells me that I'm a storyteller.
Hmm.
And I don't really, I mean, I guess listening to, basically, for example, my quote unquote, not called that way, my CEO recycling seminar is called The Challenge of Leadership, Developing Your Emotional Intelligence, whatever. But it's the life case study. I mean, I've written probably more than 100 case studies myself. You know, I went to that famous international teachers program, and I was in. But anyhow, so it's rather handy. But there I have 21 people in class who have their own story, and so I listen to stories. I let them tell their story, and of course, having listened for so many years to so many stories, there's so many stories in my head, consciously or unconsciously. And so it stimulates me to, when they tell a story, I can tell another story. I had an experience, I said, and I think we are, from Paleolithic times, we are storytellers, sitting by campfires and telling each other stories. And it is the most powerful way of disseminating knowledge, as opposed to giving some figures, some pure figures, because you slow. I always say the average attention span of my students is 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, they start to fantasize. And for men, I get something like 70-80% of the fantasies of a sexual nature. No, women are not so. So don't confuse your fantasies with their fantasies, because you might get yourself into trouble. But that's what it is. And so, but if you tell stories, that really, because we are very self-centered, you start to relate it to yourself. So the mere fact, that's what's an eye-opener for the people. Say, listen, we have 21 people in class. So 21 people are going to tell their stories. It must be quite boring. No, because every story you tell, you relate it to yourself. You said, I had a similar experience, or I was different. Was I lucky that didn't happen to me, etc., etc. So storytelling is the most powerful tool you can have in education. And some people are very good storytellers, other less storytellers, but it's important. And of course, if you have the element of also sometimes taking a meta perspective to look at your story from a distance and say, so what happened to me? And that's what I try to do, really, how to create more reflective leaders, not having a knee-jerk reaction. And the sad thing is, as you probably know, many executives self-destruct when they become, the famous word hubris. Excessive pride is such a true situation when you need to be somewhat narcissistic to go to the top. But it gets accentuated by the perks of the top. So, I mean, I've seen it too many times going to certain banks and the private elevators, the private dining rooms. I mean, all the people tiptoeing around you. It doesn't.
Dans la cour, as we say in French.
It very quickly can go to your head.
Yeah, I certainly saw a lot of that.
And you start to surround yourself by an echo chamber after a while, and you don't get the information anymore. And people start to filter information. I mean, look at the craziness of Trump by his cabinet meetings, where people have to say "Hail to the chief" before they start. It was so nuts. I mean, you start to wonder about the average intelligence of a voter sometimes. And when you look at that and say, "Listen, this is certainly not a healthy sign." In other situations, people would be institutionalized.
Well, I do think that the part of our problem is that as a society, we're not doing enough analysis and investigation and doing the hard work with the responsibility of voting.
No.
But when you talk about storytelling, I certainly believe that I was able to tell stories when I was running a company worldwide, but it takes time to tell stories. It doesn't look like you're being the hyper efficient, super effective dude who's leading and charging and, do this, do that, and executing, and what the CEO is all about.
That's an illusion. Come on, you know better.
Of
course. A good CEO is a good storyteller. That's what it is. I mean,
but why don't more CEOs, more leaders get into storytelling and allow for it to happen? Because my personal feeling is that a good story is personal. a good story has to relate into you personally. Otherwise, it's just like some sort of superficial rendering, some Teflon story that you're just delivering out.
Mm.
And I think that so many CEOs don't have the confidence or something to actually let that personal side come out.
Maybe you should teach them. I mean, what are the biggest phobias of CEOs? I mean, public speaking and fear of spiders, maybe, and snakes. That's some
and death, I'm sure.
Now that they don't talk about that, they keep that somewhere. They put it, but be very good in compartmentalization. No, I mean that would be. I think they could really benefit. I think in our advanced management program, one of the things you have to do is to tell your story in 5 minutes. You know, to learn. I ask my students, if you have to give a speech to you're invited by your college or university to give the graduation speech. So you have, it shouldn't be too long. I remember one CEO of a pharmaceutical company obviously gave quite some money to our school. He couldn't stop. And of course, the students want to have some champagne and want to see their family members. So the paper airplanes were flying around and he saw it. He never looked up from his text. I remember also, but I think it was the head of the BCG at the time. He was fantastic. In 15 minutes, he said some of the lessons learned, and but to make him to tell a story which is personal, which he did, telling those young, of course, the trophy would be McKinsey and BCG or so or whatever, and some investment bank. Tell them about some of the personal things he learned. And it's quite a good challenge, and that I think could be good training for. Any CEO he should be a coach, of course. That's what ask these people to tell stories. I actually many years ago I was asked to go to Saudi Arabia and I had become an advocate of team coaching. I mean, I'm probably one of the persons who had been, that's probably one of the distinctive competencies I'm pretty good at. Give me one neurotic top executive team, I make something out of it. Unless they're completely psychotic, I've seen it also, but it's rare. And there was an executive team of a very large company in Saudi Arabia. And the man was an interesting way he got about it. He picked, if you, I think at the time, of course, Saudi Arabia is changing now, to find people who are achievement oriented. Those people usually went to the Petroleum Institute, I understand. And then if they were good, they got a scholarship to go to America to a doctorate. So they could got maybe a doctorate in nuclear physics or whatever. But if you do a doctorate in engineering, whatever it might be, that's not a training for being a team player. And that's, you are, and so he had to build a team. So then they had to go back, what I understand, and they had to teach at the university where there were many very boring bored students, which was not exactly the greatest stimulus. So he would ask them, can you tell us, I mean, it's a new management book comes out. Can you tell a story? Tell the people who are there, us, summarize and tell a story about it. And it was a very good way, I felt, to get a sense how good they were in, disseminating knowledge to other people. And that's, I think, an important factor for anybody, in particular when you're in a high-tech environment. But the training, you should you propagate it more. I do my part of it.
I'm with you. Hey, Manfred, I'm with you. And I did a documentary film on the Second World War. And the reason why I did it outside of a professional space is it's about professionalizing the idea of telling a story. How much pathos do you want to include according to the medium that you're using? Because if you use film, the pathos is much stronger. So dial it back because you don't want to overdo it. If you're writing a book, it's pretty dry. How do you pep it up and make it fun? Like you're in the CEO Whisperer, you start off with this long story, which, by the way, I thought was completely fabricated, but you kept on referring to it. So like, oh my God, it's real.
It's real.
And stories beget.
I made some changes, of course. Otherwise,
okay. Well, including the name, I'm sure.
But it was worse. It was worse.
Oh boy. But I mean, stories beget stories. So not only is a story a fascinating way to transmit your message, it makes people engage into it and then connect into it, which is really so important when you're talking about building a team, because you relate in, especially when the story is personal, because then you're engaging at a different level.
Of course, one thing what I struggle with, when people tell me stories in my class, for example, and you probably know the concept of negative capability, which comes actually from Pope, an English poet. The element of not knowing. I listen to a person's story, and since I'm supposed to be the specialist, I'm sitting in front of the class, I'm supposed to know. They don't really know that. The older I get, the less I know. That has been an exponential curve. So I sit there and listen, and said, "What the hell is he really telling?" Because there's a story underlying the story. Yeah. What is really going on? And I sit there and struggle. In the beginning, I used to be anxious because I wanted closure. And now I know that the class is going to help me. There are a lot of brains there, and slowly the real story comes out of there. But it's still, and sometimes it will never come out of there. But generally it comes. And so I think that's probably my head as a psychoanalyst, because you talked about different heads. I've had as a management professor, I had an economist maybe, had as a general human being. But also I'm a psychoanalyst. Although as I try to tell people, I'm not a religious psychoanalyst. I do anything that works. Freud had a lot of good ideas, a lot of bad ideas too. So, and I'm very interested in evolutionary psychology, developmental psychology, cognition, all those neuropsychiatry. So I mix all those kind of things to try to make sense out of it. But what is the story behind the story, which is also to me interesting? What is going on? What is the person struggling with? What is he or she trying to disseminate to us? And what is not being said? That's also quite interesting, because you have a story and said something doesn't sit together. It doesn't make sense. There's something missing. What kind of sense? Of course, you can say to people, tell me everything, as a psychoanalyst would do. That's, of course, bullshit. Nobody tells everything. You censor. And of course, when you start to have more trust, that's, by the way, and of course, a factor in order. I've made lots of plea for, what I try to do is to create more reflective leaders, but also create better places to work. Because as you know from the Gallup polls, around 80% of people are not engaged.
That's for sure.
Terrible. It's terrible. So what can you do to have people a more fuller life, more balanced life, and how they can, to give them most of their energy, coming back to my energy barometer, to the things they are good at, and are making the right choices.
One of the things, Manfred, you talk a lot about, and I had a great time reading The CEO Whisperer. I know you've written a whole slew of books, and unfortunately we can't get into them through this pandemic, but certainly cause for everybody listening to go jump in and check out your body of work. But something that's obviously running through all of what you write about is this idea of self-reflection and self-awareness, getting to know who you are as a leader and tapping into what's important to you, what is your purpose. So the question I have, and it's probably a vast question, but I don't know how you want to handle this, but what is you? When you are trying to understand who you are, the container of you, there's the name, there's the title, there's the me on a good day, there's me on a bad day. Mm-hmm. And how do you actually, is it even possible to have full knowledge of self?
No. That is, that's, I think, very difficult. And to help you to see through your biases, the various defense mechanisms, it's important usually to have some guidance. And of course, that's part of the psychoanalytic process that you, I had two analysts, one quite famous here in France, Kiwi, Joyce McDougall, who wrote a lot about, people think that the idea of the inner theater is for me. It's not for me, it's from her. She wrote a number of books about the theater of the mind, theater of the body, and things like that. Then I had a second one in Montreal, who was the head of psychiatry, Maurice Dongier. And so they were very helpful to make some sense, but it's a work in progress. Also new life experiences come. And so, in that respect, people say, I want to go into psychoanalysis. It's quite luxury to be so many times a week, just Of course, people had prayer and things like that. Sort of they went to a priest, whatever it might be, or a rabbi, or whatever it. But some people are lucky; they have some good friends, or they have a good partner. I mean also wife, husband who can help them. And I was a few years ago, before the pandemic, I was in Malaysia, and there's a tribe there. I was fishing. I went for the snake fish, strange fish, which apparently is a primitive fish which has to go up and breathe. But snakehead fish, a snakehead it's called. I was curious about that, so I was with a friend, and there was a tribe there, the Samoy, I think, Samoy. And they had a habit, I mean, M or an N, I'm not sure. They had a habit, apparently, which is like, maybe it's just a story, that they, every morning, they would tell each other their dreams. And I'm a strong, and that was a good, and the one was a dissertation written about, I believe, that they had great mental health, because they were trying to detoxify certain, I mean, dreams are very often a way of practicing difficult situations, particularly when young people. And that's the reason youngsters have so many nightmares, children I'm talking about. Otherwise, of course, it's dreams are trying to tell you certain things you don't want to hear in daily life. So I pay attention to my dreams. And the nightmares, adults don't have many nightmares, but if you have repetitive dreams and nightmares, there's something going on with you and you don't want to listen. You're refusing to listen to that. But as I said, it's not bad. And if you're a coach, for example, and there's so many coaches, it can be a very lonely existence, and you get lots of toxic material. You're a garbage can. People throw garbage into you, and you have to detoxify it. And so I think it's a very important factor to have supervision, to talk to people about it, and try to get some other point of view, and maybe give the toxic material, move it onward one way or another. It's and again, it has, when you talk about the talking cure, and you talk about storytelling, the talking cure, just the mere fact, I see that when people tell their stories about their life, it's like, you talk about films, making a documentary. And what are you going to put in documentary? What kind of events are you going to put in documentary? Because you don't have enough time to put everything in documentary. And, and it has a very cathartic experience when people listen attentively. Just listen, because I tell people not to interrupt, let them talk. They have so much time to talk, and after that, they can have some questions of clarifications only. And then the listener has to shut up and just listen to the free associations of the people, what they make out of it, what they think is going on, what are some of the issues, and how they can be helpful, given their own experiences, and can their own story. When I was in your situation, that kind of thing. And that makes the seminar so powerful, because I mean, in those programs, the master degree program, the powerfulness of these programs are not just the conceptual material, which is also given. It is that you get a fairly intense form of psychotherapy in a group setting. That because I had recently had a person in my class who obviously was a micromanager. And he was very successful in being a micromanager, because the company was not so big yet. But he had been so successful that he may become a victim of his success. But he refused to see it. He felt it was appropriate that he would act that way. And so the famous statement, that's the advantage of a group setting. When one person tells you your ears like a donkey, ignore it. But if 10 people tell you ears like a donkey, you might get yourself a saddle, And so I made a slight comment about maybe he should look into it, but it was Teflon. Then the next day, I felt maybe we should pick it up again and have some more discussion about his way of managing his business. So he talked again, and then suddenly the whole class got loose, and they all told him stories about how it ends in misery. And that time, I think he heard it. He heard it. Now, I'm curious, because I'm going to see him next week, and see what he has done. That's
a change. But, obviously, that when you're the leader at the top of the pyramid, it's a lonely place. You talk about that. and people tend to tell you what they think you want to hear as opposed to what you need to hear. And so creating an environment where you have a mentor or you have peers that you trust and who are prepared to listen and with some level of good intentionality, giving you feedback. I think that's also another thing that's really a missing piece with so many leaders who in their tour d'ivoire, their ivory tower, they don't have the information. They're not connecting with people. They have this narcissism that's going to their head, and they forget how they got there. They forget their personal story. And I suppose I'm wondering if by telling your story, as you were talking about, or talking about your dreams, would you characterize that as a way to unwire, to dewire some of the thinking, the programming, the story that you've gotten fixed in your mind about who you are and can't be anything else?
Yeah, but as I said, it's that's the reason I prefer to work in team setting, because it goes faster. Of course you will dewire, but it takes longer. Like, for example, this gentleman who is this micromanager. If I have another person who's also a micromanager who is now, but it takes more time. I've been hammering at him in a friendly way, and trying to see the paradoxical nature of the things. And of course, the first thing, of course, in any relationship is that that person feel that you have the best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. That's what they call, in the working alliance, you develop a working alliance. But in a group setting, it becomes more powerful, because a lot of the work, for example, in the class next week, is not done in class. It's done at breakfast time, at lunchtime, at dinner time. People make
the coffee break.
Yeah, exactly, making jokes about the person again. And so it is really slowly, and that is the power of this kind of programs, where people tell stories, and the little anecdotes are being told in between. And so slowly they start to say, maybe. And then, of course, I sometimes say I work on shame and guilt, because people have lots of good intentions. I start dieting, exercising, whatever, but then they fall back into the old patterns. So I don't believe in programs which are nothing bad about a quickie, but my programs are long. So, for example, this program is 4 weeks, over a year, and I actually have them 3 times, with 2.5 months in between. Then I wait half a year and see if they really, walking the talk, all the things they have promised to do. Because now it's not just me, it's the whole group, because the group is in their head.
You have to be accountable to the group.
Yeah, and of course nowadays with some technology like WhatsApp has been a real good thing, because all those groups are on WhatsApp and they communicate with each other. So you get reinforced in between. Otherwise, there's a big period in between. So yes, so the group intervention method, it goes a little bit quicker.
So there's another theme or that you talk about, which is, and it's a little hard word to say, but an authentizotic organization.
I know you were going to get there, yes.
Oh, what is it? What is it? And how do you achieve it?
That's, of course, paradise. It's like it's the impossible dream. No, I have written some articles about authentizotic organization. It's even, I think, a Portuguese made an authentizotic test, which it's, the 2 Greek words. It's my narcissism. I decided to develop a word, authentikos and zotikos, but basically a place where you feel alive. Now, organizations, as you all know, are not democratic institutions. It's the gorilla model, not the bonobo model of management. It's not a networking model with all the excuses people maybe are very hierarchical. And they are also containers of paranoid and depressive anxiety, coming back to organizations. And so how to create an atmosphere where people can be a little bit vulnerable. Storytelling, by the way, is a way to show some vulnerability. And vulnerability makes, how do you create some trust? And that's what I try to do. So, for example, when you have a team, an executive team, when I was the director of the Global Leadership Center, I went into an area which I don't like, but I seem to have been pretty good at it, psychometrics. Of all things, me and psychometrics. So I developed quite a number of psychometric tests, because I had to help my coaches, because I had this whole stable of coaches. And since coaching is not mass production, I can teach 10 people, and I've done once in Moscow in the Olympic Stadium, 20,000 people entertained. That is kind of crazy. So, but coaching is bricolage, small work. And so the way it's structured, they don't have much time. So I needed some material for them so they could work with that. So I developed number 360 test. And that has been, the way to actually, what I can coming back, how to create an organization where people feel somewhat safe, where people feel alive, they can talk. And to have this team setting, I look at the statistics of the psychometric test and see this person, no emotional intelligence, terrible in team, has no vision. Of course, I don't have to tell him that or her that. I mean, you don't have to be a whiz kid to see you can see the graphs. But then I asked them, tell your story. And I did it actually with a lot of well-known companies. And, one premier strategic consulting firm. They start to pick up my way of doing it. But you want to ask yourself, why is this person has become a director coming from Greece, is now working in New York as one of the directors of this premier strategic consulting firm, and those graphs don't give it, but tell your story, what you do. And it is very powerful. And when you do that, when you have a team of that, I mean, this company, for example, this consulting firm, pride itself will be the best in leadership. But, to have a team, one person from Sydney, one person from Bombay, one person from Frankfurt, they have to work together as a team. But how can you really work together as a team when you don't know each other? So when you have told your story, you have a network, a very powerful network. You have heard the things about the person. You feel comfortable with the person. You know why the person is the way they act, the way they do. You make some contracts between the person. So the storytelling is an extremely powerful way of creating teams. And that's what I've been doing. And that's the way I've been trying to create this authentizotic organization, basically organization which are aligned, where people exchange knowledge, where people feel relatively safe. It's all relative, because again, organizations are not democracies. If you are the leader of the pack, you know that eventually you might make some decisions about the career, salary, whatever it might be. And it's always there. It's always hovering around there. And even though companies try to split, you are a judge and you are a coach. But it's always there. You have performance appraisal, and then you have a developmental appraisal. You have to split it. It's you have been exposed to that. It's a little bit of a farce in that respect, because the reality is it's a fantasy. But coming back to the authentizotic organization, it's maybe my way to create to show what you can aim for, to give people voice. They feel that they're involved, to give them a certain sense of safety, because most top executive teams, there is a woman in Amy Edmondson, I think, talk about safety, but really we talk about trust. But many people don't feel safe in organizations. They feel, this paranoia is always there, and we are, from an evolutionary point of view, if you look in the bushes, you see this kind of a rosy thing over. You think, okay, it could be wild strawberries, or could be the tongue of a saber-toothed tiger. You better be on your guard.
In any event, there'll be brambles.
That's true.
Hey, Manfred, just delightful. So many of the things you have spoken about, the stories you've told, resonate already just with me. And I really appreciate you being a voice of bringing that authenticity, but that's a real authenticity, one that includes my vulnerabilities, my imperfections, and understands that we are human beings. And even though we might have a big title, we need to know how to be real. How can you recommend people get in touch, or at least get your books? Do you just say go to that Amazon company in Seattle, or do you have other places you like people to follow you, see your readings and writings?
I started once a consulting firm, actually, which is now run by my daughter, and they are busily. I mean, I'm supposed to be the chairman, but that's more an honorary title. I mean, since I've written quite a few books on family business, I decided to be an exemplary. So she's in charge, and she's doing a terrific job. And but they can always type in KDVI, and they see lots of seminars, workshops which are being done, which probably might originally have a stamp of me there. And sometimes I even participate. depending on my mood. So that's, but you know, it's I can only do so much. Unfortunately, I'm cloning. Cloning is that's what it's all about.
Hey, new technology. Thank you so much, Manfred. It's been a great pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.